The surprise is that Ade wasn't able to get his visa on time, so he's joining us on Google Plus. Like, this is an opportunity which lets us showcase one of the products, like Google Plus Hangouts. So he'll be joining us through Google Plus. Can you switch?
Hi guys.
Hey Ade, so maybe
I'm Darlene.
Exactly. So maybe you can start by quickly giving an intro and reason why you can't make it to the event, and then we can get started.
Sure. The general problem was I think I was in Russia the week before. I sort of landed from Russia back in London, and I started to realize I had a very short number of days to try to get my visa for India, and that wasn't going to happen. So we decided to do this because it was definitely guaranteed to happen. Hangouts are more reliable than trying to get visas.
Exactly.
I'm not quite a Dalai Lama, but it's a similar situation.
And we get to showcase Google Hangouts, right? That's an awesome.
That's true, and I get to show you what our office looks like.
Yeah, so he's joining us from the London office, and you get to see the office, right?
As you can see, the weather's better in Bangalore than it is in London.
So we can switch back. Of Google APIs. This is a deck that Adi, he's like a developer advocate for Google Plus, and he uses this deck to present the content on it. I'm just running through it. I'll give my introduction as we go forward. So what we'll do is we'll keep the questions to the end because I'll bring him back, and he's the right person to answer all the questions that we have. So we can get started on that. Yeah. So first of all, this is not like a vendor pitch that we have here. This is not selling Google Plus to anyone. What we'll be sharing next 40 minutes or so is a series of experiences that we have, some mistakes and our learnings from those mistakes, and how some of those learnings help us create a better developer experience from what we see. So my name is Uttam. I am a program manager for developer relations at Google India. I've been at Google like for 4 months now, based out of Hyderabad office. My job is to talk to the developers in India, understand what are their pain points if they want to develop stuff on, say, Android, Chrome, HTML5, Google Plus, though there are not those many APIs as of now, Maps. What are your pain points? How we can make life better for you to make you successful is what my mandate is. And this is Ari. So can we switch? So we have a slide talking about you, Ari. You want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Google now about 5 years. I worked on Buzz, I worked on Jaiku, I worked on before that I worked on search, and I worked on mobile and some ad stuff as well. And before that, well, I wrote a book. But what I do now is I work on Google Plus, mostly the APIs and how we can improve the developer experience.
Share stuff. So all these small steps are in a direction to make the life much more simpler for people in terms of how they use Google in their daily life, and that is in the side of user experience. So at Google, what we did is we started understanding how developers behave and tried to put more effort towards developer outreach. We put up a page, developers.google.com, which is a central point for all the Google APIs that you want to use. This got rolled out in February, and we are adding all the documentation. So this is like one-stop solution for all the documentation that you would require, be it Google Plus, be it Android, be it Chrome, Maps, Google TV. This is the international page. So a lot of APIs might not be available in India, but we just want to make it like one single stop solution for everyone. However, what we feel is like bringing all the documentation together is not enough, right? You need to integrate the APIs also, the way they behave, the way you use them. That's how the user experience gets created. Talking about Google, the integrated experience, and then comparing it with developer experience. So in order to understand this thing better, what we will do now is we will explore 3 case studies. And I will try to ask some questions in terms of trying to get some engagement from you guys. Some of you might have experience with these 3 case studies that we are going to talk about. And then, so first 2 are our lessons, and third is the way forward that we are looking at. So how many of you have heard of this term, G data APIs, Google data APIs? So we have 1, 2, we have like 4, 5 people here. So this was a protocol which was set up so that you can read, write, and modify content over web. The strong emphasis was on Atom. Atom Pub was being used, and JSON. So anyone knows who Tim Ray is? So he was the person behind setting up the whole Atom standard, and he works at Google. So you know we are passionate about Atom. That's why we invested heavily on Atom here. And not just like that, the whole company invested a lot. There was a lot of investments made. There were iterations trying to understand what is working in this API, what is not working, how can we improve it. So this is a sample code. This is very small, I know, but I don't know how we can do it better. Maybe for the people sitting in the front rows, can you point out a couple of things which are not good with this code here? So this is a simple hello world thing. We are trying to get the email and password and then trying to do something with it, but let me just point out few glaring issues over here. Yeah, if you can raise your hand, I'll just ask quickly. Yeah, I know that's quite hard, yeah. So one of the problem here is the password is being passed in the code. Right, if you would look right here. And second is, there's no model, the model of the domain is not being done. So this is a graphic of a Google engineer when he was trying to use G data over time. As you can see, his frustration kept growing on and on. Because what we were trying to do here is we were trying to be very compliant with REST and Atom. And in order to be highly compliant, we were making maybe developers' life not that enjoyable. They were not enjoying building on things like this. And even to do like simple things like hello world was a tedious task, as you would have seen there, right? So this is one experience that we got. Anyone heard about Buzz? Anyone used Buzz API? But you heard about the product. So again, with Buzz API, we invested much more on standards. We said, okay, we'll bring in activity streams, we'll bring Atom, Atom Pub, JSON, OAuth was introduced, PSHB, media RSS, all these things. The idea was standards are good. Standards are how people want to look at things. So let's integrate all the standards together and then try to present something for the developers so that they can consume and they can build things on top of that. As you can see, a lot of standards were used here. These are the key things which were part of Buzz API. JSON client libraries were provided. Standards were adopted heavily. A lot of focus was given on standards. Developers were interviewed. The UI was a mirror image of the API. So the UI reflected the API, and here the API was able to model the domain. The good news was anybody could build their own client library on top of HTTP after this Buzz thing came out. Possibility to reuse things was there. We picked up GeoRSS, which is a way for location-based RSS kind of a standard, which was not really used before this. We brought it in limelight, and people became aware of OAuth. So these were the good news. What was the bad news? That people, as we saw here, Buzz API didn't get that popular. OAuth became very popular. GeoRSS, we were using it for the first time. So we were the ones to face all the brunt of early adopting a standard. We got stuck in a lot of issues, bugs, everything around that. And another thing that you have to understand over here is specifications sometimes don't translate into standards. I can write a specification, but it only becomes a standard when a lot of people adopt it, right? So that is a key learning that we had over here. And fourth that we identified, and I think Addy can reflect more light on this towards the end, is even for building like hello world kind of a application, which is really small. Again, people were trying to build their own client libraries to do small and simple tasks, which doesn't make user experience, the developer experience any better, right? It's a bad news for Buzz, it's good news for Google. Like the idea over here is to make Buzz popular, right? Yeah. So then we talk about Google Plus API. What we do over here is put developer experience at the center of the things. We say that user experience applies to developers because developers are people too. So let's try to identify and let's try to look at it in a lens of like the product management term of user experience and doing the right thing for the user all the time is very popular. Let's try to bring the same kind of a parallel to developer landscape. And four things. One is UX techniques for developing developer-focused products, bringing whatever user experience learnings that we had, bring it here. The second is on focus on OOB, out-of-box experience. So how many of us, just like, suppose we buy a new camera from Amazon, and as soon as it comes, like we are really excited to open it and just try it out. And these people, they leave a little bit of battery in the camera because they know that the owner of the camera is really excited and he will try it out. So that's called like the real excitement of out-of-box testing, and somewhere it was missing, and we did over here. Use conventions over configuration. So one of the learnings that we had is, once we expose someone to a new API, we give them a lot of options to configure. Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Right now, I'm not really sure what I want to do. So how can I go about and configuring all these things? Maybe the best way is to set up some things right now, and which when the person gets used to the API, he can come back and modify them at a later point in time. So that was the third learning. And fourth is, so this is interesting. When some of these APIs were launched, a lot of known issues were, we were aware of known issues. So whenever a customer calls, hey, this thing is not working, there's a solution for this is how you solve it. Like a lot of solutions, problems, we knew what the solution is, and we were telling people again and again. So why don't you code it back and give those solutions as part of the package that you have, right? Instead of asking people to do like FAQs kind of a thing. So what does this mean for Google+? There's this famous saying from Steve Jobs, like design is not what it looks and feels, design is how it works. It's like design is not something that you create a product and then you can make it beautiful by adding design on top of it. Design is just how the thing works. Like a great example can be a door, right? A door can work in three ways. You can pull it, you can push it, and you can slide it. If there are handles on both sides of the door, and the door is opening only in one direction, so you can imagine there would be irritation, right? For some people who are trying to pull it when the obvious motion is to push it. A simple way of solving it out is you only give the handle when there is an option to push, and from the other side you remove the handle and there's only a flat way. So the obvious intuition is to push the door. This is how you add design to make life simpler. This is a user experience kind of an example. And this is again a saying, like if you try to be indifferent to what matters to people, and if you try to be indifferent to what people really care for, at the end you will be like committing a cardinal sin, as said here. So the focus over here is to solve real problems for real people. And who are these people? Forefront is like the users, because they are the ones who are like probably most least tech savvy and most common users. Second set are external developers, and third set is the internal developers that we have. Let's look at some of the problems and how we are trying to solve it. People don't want to learn REST, OAuth, HTTP. Like these are a bunch of standards. I know standards are cool, but I don't have time for learning all these standards. I just want to get my code ready, ship it out, because that is what I'm being paid for. So solution is you give a bunch of client libraries which do these things for you, and you just build your application on top of these client libraries. We can't afford to build and maintain every language, so solution is discovery, which gives you documentation, JSON documentation describing some of the APIs and how you can use it. People don't want to deal with like, okay, we are excited about Atom, but rest of the folks are not. That's why we had the first two case studies. So how do you solve that bridge? You default to JSON. You give people what they really want. And you just not default to JSON, but you default to JSON which can be easily read, so that the pain that a person has in debugging a particular piece of code is solved out. And the extra effort of giving out this kind of a content is worth it if you solve the problem of those hours that someone spends in debugging. Oh, this is an interesting one. Like I'm sure this is like still a growing trend in India, but people do want to know their partner before they get married. You want to date a person before you get married. Same thing applies to developers. They want to check out the API before they want to make a commitment. Do I want to use this or do I not? So this is a tool, API Explorer. I know the screenshot is not good, but we'll be posting all these slides at the end of the session, so you'll have access to all these slides. These are public slides. So what this lets you do is, it lets you specify the parameters, what API do you want to use, and then execute it, and shows the result over here. So instead of setting up your own dev environment and going through the pain of setting it up, you just test it out, see if this is the thing that you want to try out, and then you go and adopt it. Now this is a big problem. I personally have faced it. I will not name what API is, but this is a pain, right? You sign up and then say, okay, see you in 2 days when we'll mail you the API key. And I'm excited now. I'm not excited 2 days later when you mail me the API key. And the worst is if I'm trying to use 4 APIs, then 4 different keys come, and they come like 1 day or 2 days later. By the time I'm busy in something else. So this is a problem. How do we solve it? We provide an integrated API console, which gives you the flexibility of turning on and off different APIs, lets you manage your quota. So your billing and everything happens at this one central place, a better experience for developers, right? So this is a famous saying from a movie called Lion King, which talks about the circle of life, how a person comes into this world, he grows, matures, lives his life, and he dies at the end. We feel, and this is a parallel which has been drawn to products. Product has a life cycle. I think the same applies to APIs as well. We launch API, they are used, and if they are great, then they get misused, because if the API is great, only then it will be misused. Based on the feedback that you get from developers, you absorb that feedback, quickly iterate, maybe provide revisions, and at some point there would be a time when the API becomes redundant and you replace it. And in this whole process there will be a lot of mistakes that you will do. So what we have learned is to keep a close eye on what the developer pulse is, provide a public issue tracker through which they can report issues, which is for all the APIs that we have, mailing list for questions and all. All these four things are standard, but the fifth thing that we have is really key, to run office hours. So this is like a dedicated office hour that Google developers team across the world runs, and it is run through Google Hangout, the technology that we were just using. So these folks, the developer advocates and developer program engineers, they set up their time. Okay, India, Thursday, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. I am available to answer any Android question. You just come to this forum, ask your question, you can just go back. And the same thing is run for Chrome, the same thing is run for Google+, the same thing is run for apps, everywhere. And the point of contact where you can get all these events, what Hangout is happening, developer.google.com, the one-stop solution. So this is interesting, and I modified it. Ade used the word religion. I changed it to belief because we are presenting it in India. So how many of us prefer using REST? Can we have like show of hands? And how many of us prefer RPC? Okay, so we support both, because what we have identified through our experiences, people are actually more fond of RPC, and they both have their own place. Versioning is a common problem with APIs, right? The versions, new version coming out and the old version, how do I manage it? Most of the versions in these APIs are in the URL, which is easy to track. And the second thing is, we are now seldom incrementing versions. Now this is a key question, like in the beginning of the slide I showed the new API for Google+. So should the UI that you, the new UI for Google+, so should the new UI reflect the API? Because that's a pain point for the external developers. The UI that you have for your product doesn't, maybe it's not relevant. What I'm using is the backend data. So the API should ideally not be tied up with UI, and this is a new learning that we have, and this is what we are doing. JSON is again like clearly emerging as a winner, and so we are giving people what they want. So Chris Chabot is Ade's manager, and I think that's the reason why we have him here. So this is his Google+ page. This is his picture. This is his name. That's his status. These are his, some of the pictures that we have. And this is what the data would look like if you run a like Google+ API on his content. This is how it look like. I know this is like not visible. So just one question I have here. So for this verified tag, like this person is verified. So Google says, yes, this person is actually what he's presenting himself to be. The code that I just showed over here, believe me, though you can't see it, but believe me, that was not here in the data right now, the verified tag. So how do we do it? Again, two options. One is go with the standard, which involves cryptography and it's really cool way of doing it, but for developers it's a pain. They will have to learn one more standard to implement a small feature. Second is verified equals to true kind of a parameter in the data that you have. So these kind of decisions that we are making going forward is putting the developer at the front of every decision that we make, and then go ahead and make those decisions. So Google is a very data-driven company, and that's how a lot of decisions internally are made. And what we feel is, if when the data disagrees with what you believe, like we believed in Atom, data showed us that's not the case probably. So maybe it's a time to change your belief and do something which is actually what people want. So that's it. Those were the slides that I had. I think I'll bring Adi back for any questions that you have. Can you switch? Hey, Adi. So we have any questions?
Yeah, you know.
Can you pass on the mic? Avenues, because if it's next generation, it's present generation, right? We cannot present something which is next generation already. These are just steps on those directions.
What are you trying to bluff us?
No one is trying to bluff. And maybe Adi, can you take that question? Like he's talking about what's really the next generation API?
So I think the question is, what is the next generation of Google's APIs?
Yes.
So the next generation of Google's APIs, it's basically what we're doing now, but we're changing the infrastructure behind it. So that's the technology we're calling discovery. It basically means we can use the same client libraries across all our APIs, all our products, so that when people like you build things, they can use Docs, they can use Google Plus, they can use Latitude, all to build new things. The idea is we want to get people out of this mindset of, I build my product using one Google API. I wanted people to think about building their product using a dozen Google APIs to build something nobody else has ever built before. That's what we're trying for. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks, it did. Okay, guys, if you don't have any more questions, thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate it, and sorry for like the surprise that you had here. It's like nothing in our control as well in terms of we would have loved to have Adi here and present in front of you, but these are some challenges that we have to live with.
And of course, you can always follow me on Google Plus if you're interested in finding out more about the work we're doing here. Bye.
Thanks guys. See you. Bye.